Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Nolan. I'm a professor, and I'm chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at West Virginia University. And I have been involved with sort of on a loosely related to something that we're going to talk about today. And Erica, Harvey, and I have worked together on a number of related issues. So what we'd like to do is talk to you about some of this stuff. So, Erica, did you want to say hello first, and then I'll lead us through?
Sure. I'm Erica Harvey. I'm a professor of chemistry, and I actually met Jim Nolan through other parts of my life, and realized that he had skills and ideas and techniques that I'd never heard of before that could really help some stuck places I had in academic integrity issues in my chemistry classroom with very highly motivated and scared kids.
Thank you, Erica. And what I'd like to do is share my screen just for a little bit. I'm not great with this technology, so please bear with me. What do you see? Erica, tell me what you see.
I see roundtable purpose and objectives.
Looks good? Okay.
Yeah, you're not in your presentation mode yet, so if you run it as a presentation, then we'll only see the slide that you're on. It doesn't really matter because I think it's visible.
Okay, I don't see a presentation mode, but
you can go on the extreme right. There is, I don't know if I'm pointing the right thing or not, but yeah, that.
This? Okay, so let me just start, and then if it's not working correctly, we'll bring it back. So the purpose of this workshop, this roundtable, is on restorative justice, is to focus on what the topic is, and it's repairing harm and restoring community after incidents where trust is violated. So restorative justice provides an alternative to traditional punishment-centered approaches and provides offenders a path to regaining trust. And so our objective here is to give you a brief overview of restorative justice. A lot of places, and I've been part of some of the trainings around the state and around the country recently, and a lot of them give you the techniques, but they don't tell you why it's important. And we're gonna show you a few things about why restorative justice versus other forms of. I'm getting some feedback now. And then Erica and I will provide some examples from a variety of settings, and then what we hope to do is to see who's involved, who's at the table today. There's some members here, I think 8 people on the line. To what extent are you involved in restorative justice, and maybe we could connect and strengthen those ties. Before I begin, is there any questions, or Erica, did you have anything else to add?
It's a small number of people, maybe 3 or 4 participants who aren't us or tech support, that it might be worth just having everyone introduce, know what people are interested in. Yeah. And
that's a great idea.
So I'll say go in order. I can see them in the people tab. So let's go Jennifer, then Jason Nolan, then Carrie Davis. And I think that might be the people who are the participants. Can you guys unmute? In the last session, she made it so anyone could talk, but I'm not sure. If you can't talk, go ahead and just put it in the chat. Great, Jennifer. Have you any familiarity with it already, Jennifer?
Hi, yes, I do have familiarity with it. Sorry, I can't speak this morning, but I'm just really interested in the approach of West Virginia. So I came from a Virginia background. My degree was at George Mason University, and it's something that we focus on a lot is restorative justice, and I believe in that. way of handling situations because it's so much better than just being punitive. And then what the lesson is, oh, I don't have pain. It's more of I need to restore and build our community. So for me, I'm just really interested in what you guys have to say about the approach of West Virginia.
Okay, and I see that we have Carrie saying she works in K-12, here to listen and learn. And Carrie, have you used restorative justice at all? Okay, great. And Jason, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I am in teacher preparation at Fairmont State, and I would really like to incorporate more into my classes meaningfully. Most of what our conversations have been like before class starts, something has happened, and after. But certainly trends in education are going more towards including this in a meaningful way. So I'm just information gathering at this point.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
So what I'd like to do is share with you some of the reasons why restorative justice, and Erica knows this, but most of you don't, that I started my career as a police officer, and I was, like most police officers, focused on the individual. And when an individual commits a crime or commits an act of violence or something like that, we want retribution, and we want some sort of punishment to deter this from happening anymore. Or a more gentle version is a treatment. Like, we think this person is ill or needs some help, and so they need to be treated. Or they're so dangerous that they need to be incapacitated. So these forms of justice are retributive or rehabilitative forms of justice. And our entire system in higher education, in all of our institutions, are really focused in this particular area. I mean, even when you look at the way we define our problems, our social problems, we'll say that West Virginia has a problem with substance abuse disorder. And so even defining the issue as or substance use disorder, we define it as originating in the person. Like, we can, if we know where the source of it is, we can deal with it. But if we define it beyond the person, we often have some troubles. And so another focus area is the context in which social problems arise. So we know just by looking at the rates at which crimes happen, that they happen at high rates in some places and lower rates in other places. That some schools have high dropout rates. There was a neighborhood in where I grew up in Wilmington it was a large neighborhood, lots of kids. They had 0 people graduate from high school. And so it's not just likely that all the kids with some sort of a disability are going to settle in a place. There's something going on in this place. And so I put a picture here of Baltimore, and some of the behaviors that are going on. And where restorative justice comes is about repairing harms, healing relationships, and changing structures and policies. And so it's the form of justice is restorative, and distributive justice is what we're talking about. Now I'm going to share some information with you. This is from my own research. And when I talk about context, there's lots of different elements of context. One is social structure. Is we understand that there are rich and there are poor, and there's a gap between the rich and the poor, and these are all considered social structure. But there's another aspect of our social structure that relates to restorative justice, from my perspective, is if you think of the place where you live, whether it's a school or a neighborhood, or it's an academic department, or it's an academic program, that there's if you think of it as a container, and these containers contain these elements of interdependence, frustration, and dependence, and these are all measurable, and I'll show you a little bit about that. But in any sense, that resident or interdependence means residents know and trust each other. They work together to resolve community problems, and they trust the police to help them. This is mainly comes from my own policing research. But it applies, and I'll show you how it applies to academic departments. Then frustration and conflict is it's an emotional state of frustration and conflict where residents avoid each other. They don't get work well together. They don't trust the police or think they care because they are not really there to help them. And then there's levels of dependence where residents don't know each other very well, but they trust the police to protect them. So they don't see the connection between people, and they just are existing as independent and relying on the police to help them. Now, I don't want to bore you with a lot of the theory because I'd rather have more discussion about this, but from a theoretical perspective, it comes from Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory, where it's an agentic perspective, that people have agency in a sense, that there's either collective or proxy agency. When you're dealing with a collective, either the people who are part of the collective believe they're in it together, and then that gives rise to these efficacy beliefs. We believe we can do it, or we don't believe we're going to be able to accomplish it. Or the group believes that I don't need the other members, and I'm just going to depend on the authorities or someone to do the fixing for us. And this gives rise to high and low proxy agency belief, proxy efficacy beliefs. And we've extended this dynamic process to this container because where there's high levels of collective efficacy beliefs, there's high levels of interdependence. Where there's low levels of collective or proxy agency belief, efficacy beliefs, you have high frustration and conflict. And when you believe that the proxy is able to fix things for you, then we have higher levels of dependence. Now, this is important because I'll show you why. In research in West Virginia, but also in 4 cities, in neighborhoods like in Cleveland, in Pittsburgh, in Wilmington, Delaware, we have findings like this, where you can compute probabilities that in areas that have high levels of frustration and conflict, these places have 98% chance that a crime was committed in the community in the past 12 months. 70% chance of personal victimization, 98% chance that there's excessive fear, 2% chance neighbors would help someone who threatened suicide, less than a percentage point that neighbors would intervene in a fight in the street. And so you can see that these are places that are highly likely to have lots of problems, including drug abuse and other forms of violence. But if the context changes, you can see how the probabilities change. That we're places where people are interdependent and working together, and these are places where there's not likely to have crime, but you're also more likely to intervene if crime does come about. And we can come back to these. I just want to get through them so I can show you the logic behind restorative justice. Now, in an academic department, as I mentioned earlier in the first session, that I was part of the WVU advanced team, which was working with STEM departments to hire, recruit. It was mostly around gender equity issues in higher education, particularly in STEM. And so we worked in a number of different departments, but we did this survey and used these climate issues. And we found that in places like I described, high levels of frustration, these are places where people said that they didn't feel safe in the workplace. They heard denigrating remarks about people of color. They were labeled troublemakers if they spoke up. They didn't think WVU was a good place to work or provided opportunities. And honestly, almost 75% said that I'm going to get out of higher education. And so this sort of a context produced this. This was controlling for gender and race. And in the department B, with high levels of interdependence, the opposite was true. People tended to feel safe. They could speak up and speak out and weren't labeled a troublemaker. They didn't hear denigrating remarks about minority group members. they thought WVU was a good place to work and that sort of thing. So here's an example of how the context in an academic department, if you can create this kind of a context, that it can be better. And then the last one I'll show you, and then I want to show you just a quick format, and then I want to turn it over to Erica, is recently the WVU social survey was conducted, and I added these questions to the survey, and then we also asked about back pain and emotional pain and general health questions, and found that in this kind of a place, this high level of frustration and conflict in the local area, they only had a 19% chance of reporting that they were in good or excellent health. They had an 89% probability of reporting prolonged emotional pain, that it was debilitative in a sense, in the last 30 days, or 97% probability that they had physical pain, like back pains or migraines. And this was controlling for gender, wealth, family income. So we used the typical control measures, but then added these community and dynamic measures to also see. And then you can see, whereas when it's interdependent, 88% probability of reporting good or excellent health, 29% probability of emotional pain. Emotional pain was feeling depressed or feeling worthless or giving up, that sort of thing. So you can see that restorative justice, and I'll describe it here in a minute to you, but it's generally a practice where you bring people together to who are willing to try to heal, try to restore, rather than punish and catch and contain. They're trying to make things right again. And so there's a reason for doing it. So in what I've shared this with Erica before, but so I mentioned that I'm chair of the department, and one of the things that I've implemented, and this is a work in progress, so I'm not claiming success. Just understand that there's a way of organizing meetings, even on Zoom, where you could put people in a circle, and you could, one of the restorative practices is, forming the circle, peacemaking circle, where you have someone describe what happened, or if there's an ongoing something that people are frustrating people about, people acting out acts of violence, those sorts of things. And you can go around the room and you can ask people to respond. And in a sense like this, when you're on Zoom, you can put then guidelines, like at this table, we have equal voices and we want to hear them all. Everyone will have a chance to weigh in on the topics. So again, you can find out what's important to you. And these are considered restorative practices that can be used in the classroom. It can be used to settle disputes. And so I'll tell you more about it, but I want to give Erica a chance now to sort of weigh in on some of this stuff and some of her experiences.
Well, thank you, Jim, for framing the why of this. For me, the why was, I'm a chemistry teacher. I'm really focused on helping people learn a hard subject, challenging, calls lots of, and has a lot of very highly motivated students in it, pre-meds, academically excellent. And so during the pandemic last spring, not this past spring, but the year before, we were giving our tests online, and everyone transitions to online teaching, and some things changed, and I noticed grades, and I thought, well, maybe it's just that people are getting better because they're more relaxed when they take the test. But then there were a few tests where I noticed the exact same answer over and over, and these are long handwritten, written out stuff. So I approached the students involved, and they all denied it, and I was really stumped. And I shared that with Jim, and they suggested this idea of restorative justice. And so I offered my students a chance to not go into a back and forth, I'm going to prove that you did this, or, whatever that you usually get into in academics, and instead to participate in a restorative justice circle with Jim and another community member as participants in that circle, facilitating and also helping with the discussion, and our chair and dean and the other instructor involved. And so they agreed, all of them. And when they started the circle, the first thing that happened is one of the students confessed completely, just laid it all out there because Jim made it safe. The thing that's going to happen as a result of this is going to be decided in the circle. It's not something where I'm going to impose some external punishment. It's going to be something where we lay out the harms that were done, and there are more harms understood. And there are also contexts that I wasn't aware of and my other instructor wasn't aware of in the pressures that those students were facing after they went home and tried to learn and teach online, or sorry, provide feedback to me online. Do their work online is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, the circle was absolutely amazing. The students came up with the idea of making students from their own personal of why academic integrity was important. And they gave consent to put those videos in the course the next year so that the next year's students would have a chance to understand and unpack academic integrity from the point of view of someone who is in the military, someone who is an athlete, you know, someone whose parents had a lot of pressure on her. And that was really students connected a lot more with the meaning of academic integrity. And the other thing we realized, I ended up going to a conference on restorative justice in education that Jim found. And I realized that you can't, the way we did it worked, but it was the fix at the end. And really the idea of building a community from the beginning that Jim just laid out, a community where people are interdependent and don't believe an external authority is protecting them, but that they are helping to protect the community and restore the community if trust is broken. That is really important. And then this year we had another issue, not the same, but the students involved in that, we again offered restorative justice, and they strongly said that we could do even more to build the community and that they would help to build the community the next year. So I see how it offered a way out. One of the students the first year actually just wanted to be punished. He just wanted to have a harsh punishment, you know, because we're so conditioned to a punishment exonerating me at that point. And the thing that we were asking was harder. It was to restore the fabric of the community and the fabric of our classroom community. And I think for the students, the last thing I'll say is they were surprised that it did harm to the faculty members. That had literally never occurred to most of them, that we are people who cared deeply, who were really hurt when we saw that all the effort we had put in to make these tests and to allow them to have extra time online and things had in that way. They just didn't see the whole community. And so as soon as we started talking like that, really transformational things happened. So I'll stop there and let you go back to it, Jim.
Well, I wonder, I mean, it was a great experience, and it's a great example of how restorative justice can work. I wonder at this point, though, if we want to see if anybody has any questions about your experience or about the concept of restorative justice or why it's implemented. I see Jason coming on, and
yeah, I really appreciate this example because, and I would kind of like to know how you facilitated that more, because a couple of years ago I had a very similar situation where there was obvious someone copied from someone because they used words. They were trying to use big words, but they were the wrong big word in the context, and they both did it. They were in the same class. And on top of that, they were Black students. So I was like, how do I go about this in a way that doesn't like make them think I'm out to get them and whatnot? So I would be interested to know a little more about how you facilitated that conversation.
So there were two pieces to that, Jason. That's a great question. The first one, and I was really scared about this, was after I had approached several students and they just denied it, you know, to my face in Zoom. I was like, how do I get past this? So we describing restorative justice and assuring them that what happened in the circle, which would be divided decided collectively would be the way that it was addressed. And so, to my surprise, they all agreed pretty quickly. We didn't have much time because I gave them like 1 day to write back. And so they agreed to that. We then realized that we probably needed a consent form. So we did have a consent form because we were going to be talking about grades and about people's academic performance. And my dean, thank goodness, thought of that piece of it. And they all, again, sent that back right away also. But the facilitation was done by Jim. And I think that was part of the magic because he laid out the idea of how systems can produce effects. I think, Jim, the example you gave was cops who feel like they have to protect each other even when wrongdoing has happened. And so he did like a 3-minute just explanation of how you could still be an ethical person. You're just operating under different understandings and constraints. And that doesn't mean you didn't do harm, right? But that there were harms, there were pressures on you that we also weren't aware of. So if I could, that's it, is Jim. I don't know, Jim, if you could say what you said, because it was so helpful.
Well, I remember this. I remember that piece of it. Exactly what he said was, I don't remember, but I do know like in the policing world, you can enforce the law and being unbiased, but what happens is the outcome is a biased incident. Oh, I know. Now I remember. It was more along the lines of what you're saying, is that the internal affairs investigations set officers up to conceal the truth. That they would go in, and if they knew that if someone complained and said, you are, this officer used the F word, for example, in this location, and the officer knew that if I admit to this, I'm going to get 10 days penalty time, and it's going to go against me for my promotion. I'm not going to do it. And then there's this blue line that forms, and so the good officers who are trying to do the right thing are also put into a system that forces them to lie. I think that was the case.
Yeah, and that just I could just feel something happen in the room, the Zoom room, when he did that. And I think also the structure with the circle and the idea that everyone had a voice and that you weren't going to instantly be responded to, but you were going to share your perspective. We did it in 3 rounds. The first round was the context. What was happening for you in this incident? And then the second round was the harms. And then the third round was how do we restore the harms? And I think that was amazing. And you could always, if people passed in the first time, we gave them a chance to come around before we went to the next round. So that structured process made a lot of,
yeah.
Vern is asking, what punishment did the group decide on? And I think that is, yeah, Jason, I didn't mean to stop you there, but we really tried to frame it not as punishment. Like I said, one guy wanted punishment, but this is more about reparation, restoration of the community. And that's how we framed it, that academic integrity breach affected everybody in the class. It affected all those kids who didn't do it. So their voice was brought in by us and by actually some of the students who were involved even brought in that voice. And so how do we protect those people? And what they decided on was a written apology to the class, which came from the group, and it got just into Blackboard right at the end of the term, and an acknowledgement with a very straightforward acknowledgement of what had happened and the way that did harm to people in the class, and also a chance to come forward for other people, because the students felt that probably a lot of people had done things that they weren't proud of during this COVID time. And so they made an anonymous Google form and doc that the students maintained and offered students a chance to talk to the students who were involved as a sort of, they wanted to make a restorative justice council on the campus that would help other students to understand things and to come forward if they had concerns, but just didn't know what the right thing to do was, which is pretty magic, right? And then, like I said, they made the videos. And so they had their own faces and their own stories in these videos that showed up in my class the next year as a learning module.
I think one of the things that surprised me about that incident was that the students acted surprised that you cared that much, that it impacted, it harmed the professor. But I was also, it was a wake-up call for the struggles that students have. And even these high-achieving students have, they're working lots of hours. There's so many opportunities for sharing information that the rules are not clear in the Zoom world, for example. I mean, it's clear that you don't look at somebody else's paper and you steer. But in this world, we're encouraged to share information and partner with others and those types of things. It's a little fuzzy where the ethical boundary is. One of the things before I know we have a little more time, and I'd like to have more questions. But there's another. I wanted to tell you just briefly about some of the other forms of restorative justice that are in communities and in schools like secondary schools and those types of things. I know in West Virginia, I was part of some discussions in another part of the state where the teachers were all learning restorative practices. And they were, because not only do the students have conflicts, but also the parents get involved. And sometimes the students and the teachers get involved. So these circles where a meeting might be a student and a teacher, for example, if a student is acting out, the student and the teacher gets together. But when you think about it from a restorative perspective, we want to build community. You want the student to bring in some friends and some other people from the classroom, or maybe some parents or some people from the community to have this discussion, because it affects a broader range of people than just the two involved. So this was the practice in one of the counties in West Virginia, where there was a very progressive superintendent who's no longer there, but he introduced the idea to high school teachers, and it was very effective, I think. The other example that I use, because I'm working in policing in neighborhoods, we do restorative justice practices in a prison. And we have these exercises where we give examples of, we have a case where a woman is addicted to drugs. She's living in an apartment complex or a shelter, and she is strung out, and she hits somebody over the head and takes their purse and steals their money or something like that. Well, people in the room would generally say, well, okay, that's second-degree robbery. That's a mandatory 3 years or 5 years in prison, and these types of things. So we have in our minds, we get these automatic practices, almost like it's a natural law that if you do this crime, you do this time. And I think that extends to a lot of our worlds. That if you do something, the right thing to do is to punish in this way. But so we talk about what punishment actually does to a person and what punishment actually does to a group and the dynamics of punishment. Sometimes a lot of times punishment actually makes things worse. And if there's a way, it's not that it's useless, but I think that the way we use it is often harmful. And so we give the same scenario again, and we run through restorative practices where people can bring in this woman who did this robbery. You find out in this storyline that the woman that she attacked was someone that she knew. The woman, she didn't recognize her because she was on drugs. The woman thought that she had something against her, but she could tell in the restorative practice that it was just because of drugs. But it was, it was much more complicated. People knew her when she was young, and she had a bright future, and it was so much more hopeful to talk about this particular incident in the context, the broader context of, how it all unfolded and how everything is connected to everything else. That people can begin to see how restorative practices may be a much better way moving forward with policing and all other kinds of things. So let me stop there and see if anyone wants to sort of weigh in or ask any more questions.
I can weigh in a little bit about context from my students. One of the things we found out that one of the girls was living in an apartment by herself. That was the only place she could go after she was booted out of the dorm. And she had pretty severe anxiety and was struggling really hard. I was not aware of that. It never came up, right? She's in my class. So many ways had I had a community built up where she could approach me about those issues long before the kind of, at that point, minor thing of cheating, collaborating with somebody on this exam. And then another guy also had to go home, had lost a very lucrative job and was struggling very hard to pay his bills because now he had to move home where he couldn't have the job that he had before. So he's on massive stress about having lost that ability to be autonomous in his life. I think he was living in his parents' place. Anyway, it just, a bunch of context came out that I just would give anything to be able to go back and have a do-over on that semester and offer people the chance get help with the things that they didn't think they could bring to their chemistry professor.
Yeah, and you just wouldn't know that automatically, but it's enlightening. And when you hear more things like this, it brings out the compassion. And I know I attended the session before this, Erica, the one you were involved in, and some of the you talk about collaboration. These are all very good, and the approach is from a social scientist perspective is a great one. But in addition to the benefits of broadening the dialogue, listening to people, and those types of things, there's this element of community building the context in which people learn STEM, learn science, stay in higher education, want to continue. That's something that often is given short shrift in higher education. That it's about the individual learner, about the success of the individuals, but to the extent in which we can build these containers that produce higher rates of success, I think is equally important.
And giving students agency to help build those containers, because that's what a community is. It's the people investing in the community.
Right.
My guess is that a bunch of you guys who are educators are already doing that in your classrooms. So you may have the foundations, even if you're not fully using restorative justice.
I'm very incompetent at this, so I don't see the people here.
Where the chat over on the right, chat polls people Q&A, and you can see the people list.
I see.
Jennifer, James, Gianna. You haven't introduced yourself yet, but we'd love to hear from you. Carrie. Before you got on, Gina, we did have everyone just introduce. So you could put it in the chat, or you can unmute if you want and say who you are.
I think while we're waiting, if you don't mind, I'm going to give it another quick technique that we could use. Now, I showed you the table for my faculty meeting, but if you're competent at all in PowerPoint, it's easy to just make a circle and draw it out. And even on a call like this, you could quickly type in a name around one of the seats. So you could have sort of an ad hoc meeting. You could prepare a classroom in advance, but you could also, even in a meeting like this, just type in the names of the people and just go around the room once. The only reason I'm hesitant to do that today is because I'm familiar with Zoom, but I'm having a difficult time maneuvering in this particular one.
Jim, I can read it with you. The first one is Suma, S-U-M-A.
Yes.
So we're going to put you on the circle.
Okay.
I don't know if you can edit in real time.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna give it a shot. Okay.
Okay.
Let me
But
see.
the power of this is huge. I started using it in just my family has been meeting, and we're all over the country, and there's probably 10 or 15 of us, and it's amazing how it transforms to know what the order is in a Zoom call, because you're the if you have this Carrie, Carrie,
Okay.
and then Jason,
Carie.
Carrie, Jason, Jas.
Okay.
I'm not really sure. Go ahead.
Okay.
I don't know how to pronounce this, but I think it's Gina, Jeanna. Just copying and pasting.
There's probably a slicker. You can design something.
Then me,
Yeah.
and
you can
then
probably
you.
do it. Okay.
It calls out for a science and technology conference to see this, but I think, Jim, you got it from a colleague of yours who does restorative justice practice, right?
Yeah. Yes. They were. She was telling me that this is because we're in Zoom world now. This is how they were doing it. So why don't you want to lead us around then and just say a few words, starting with Suma, and then maybe going clockwise. Let's see if I can.
And what is the ask? Sort of reflection on what you've heard so far?
Yeah,
What-
reflection. Yeah, a reflection on how you may think about using restorative practices.
So Suma, I know you're our facilitator, but it would be lovely to hear from you first.
Okay, I love the session, and I'm a PhD student, so maybe in future I would love to use these techniques, and I teach like assistant some instructors, or that's
Nice, thank you.
Carrie?
you can even use the chat facility if you want to just type in your response, if you don't want to be, either way it works.
Is Carrie responding?
I don't see anything in chat yet,
Okay.
but it's hard to see people when they're.
I don't think so. We have an option of seeing them like typing or anything. So
Okay.
We can pass Carrie and then pick her up on the second time around.
Okay. Jason?
So this was fabulous. I really like this idea of doing a roundtable when we get into these circumstances in classrooms. And you're totally right. Contexts are mind-blowing sometimes when you have that opportunity to have that conversation. And I'm even thinking in a broader scope, in the School of Education right now, we are revamping the way we do dispositional issues because we have to track dispositions for accreditation. And a lot of times these come up not only in classes, but also when they get into their field experiences. So I like this idea of the roundtable, particularly with having an outside person involved. So then you have a generic, like a neutral third party that's able to see what everyone's saying and also offer their own unique perspectives.
Yeah. Great. Gina? Can you see if Gina is there?
She is no longer in the session.
Okay. And then Erica, you and me, and then I think it's a wrap.
Yeah. I appreciate the chance to do this. I always also appreciate the chance to see new technologies and explore them a little bit. Oh, and Carrie, we can pick you up. She couldn't find the unmute. I totally get it. It's so hard.
I know. Me too.
If you're ready, you can.
I'll pick you up.
Yeah, Carrie, I sent you a link so you can just click on it, and I can give you access to unmute and even your video if it's okay. So
She had it at the very
Now,
beginning. This is
yeah,
what you
this has
should
been
do.
Sorry. So as we go around the table, one of the things just to point out that everyone, there's a tendency in groups for some people to speak a lot and some people to speak a little. This sort of puts it out there for people. It balances things a little bit. And again, with the mindset of I need to build community, intentionally build community, because it's not just because I think it's right, because my disposition is more that way. It's because it really makes places safer. It really makes places better. It really makes people healthier, emotionally and physically. It really, there's data that support this sort of thing. So I'm sort of committed to this sort of thing. And so if anybody wants to know more information, I want to go back around and hear from Carrie, though, before we leave.
Okay. Oops, I have to uncover myself. Can you see me now? Hi. So, as I mentioned earlier, I work in K-12 education. So I have never used restorative justice in a formal manner. But what I have used in the past is sort of like a social contract with students. When there are offenses or whatever you want to refer to them, issues that crop up in the classroom, we have a form the students fill out, and it is their perspective, their description of what the issue is, why the issue is occurring, what alternate choices they could have made, and what they think should happen if it continues to be a problem in the future. And we usually have them sign it. I sign it. We talk about it. If it's one of the elementary level, they take it home and have their parents sign it. And that's kind of the contract that we hold in place for addressing similar issues in the future. But usually, again, a lot of it is with the students, it's focused on punitive things. They come up with, a punishment idea, and it's not so much about the changing of forth as you've talked about. So that's why I was really interested in about your and how that you get to really make those changes stick going forth.
Well, this is a work in progress. Okay, so and we, as you mentioned, the normal procedure is not typically restorative. It's about individual responsibility and accountability and those sorts of things. And so the way it plays out in the extreme, when you look at, as I described, that a whole neighborhood, no one graduates from high school, and these huge gaps in terms of achievement. There's a tendency to think it's about individual responsibility, individual accountability, but nobody's responsible. Nobody's accountable for building the context which produces these sort of outcomes. And this is how societies reproduce the same sorts of outcomes that they always have. And so I think that there are some teachers in kindergarten through 12th grade who are being innovative, and they're trying these restorative practices with some good luck also. And I think it'll take more people doing this kind of thing before it actually catches on.
Thank you so much. It was really fun to talk to you guys, and we weren't sure who we'd
An expert who can help us even more
because we're just people who started. Well, I am certainly the person who stumbled. Jim's got a lot of expertise.
So thank you all for this. I know we're out of time, so I'm going to sign off. But it's nice
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for attending the session, and a very special thanks to our presenters, James Nolan and Erica Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye, Seema. Bye-bye.